Hello everybody and welcome to the Season 7 tier list. It has been a little bit since we have done the last one just because of the timing of when we finished the season. I actually finished the season last Sunday, but have to wait until the next Saturday to upload. So we'll actually get another tier list very soon, as I'm currently in the middle of watching Jack in the Pack, and that's about 13 episodes. In about 2 weeks expect the next tier list. But without further ado, let's get into this current one. So as always, we will do the episodes in order, the season order. So we will start with Emily's new coaches, which I think is a really nice way to almost encapsulate the season. I'm going to put it in A tier. I have some minor gripes with this episode, mainly just the character's treatment of Emily when they see her with Thomas's coaches. It's kind of a petty thing to get mad at her for. I mean, we don't know the context. I mean, they don't know the context of why she has the coaches. If there was like a scene of Thomas telling the others that she stole their coaches, then I could see them having that opinion, but I don't know, it was a little weird. But other than that, I really do like this introduction for Emily. I like that it immediately pits her and Thomas against each other in a dynamic that we see very commonly pitted against each other throughout the show's run. And the other reason why I think it's the epitome of Season 7 is really just its use of characters. You know, you get Thomas and Emily, but you also get Oliver involved. It's a really nice introductory episode, and I will just say this right now, I really enjoyed Season 7 a lot more than I did Season 6, and this is a season that I think the fandom is slowly coming back around to, and I think a lot of people are realizing how good the season is. And one thing we're going to notice is there's a lot of really interesting character dynamics, and they really worked in the new characters well, in my opinion, in this season. Emily obviously being the best example because she would soon become a main character, but for right now, for starting off a new season with a new character, very solid A tier episode. And we're going to go stay in A tier with another story I really enjoy, Percy Gets It Right. I like this episode even as a kid. I think this is one of my favorites actually as a kid. I like the atmosphere of this episode. It is weird that the Fat Controller doesn't immediately listen to Percy. It's weird he kind of ignores him, but other than that, I kind of like the idea of Percy's been this silly character for most of the show at this point, and finally it's kind of like a weird boy who cried wolf story. Now Percy's really serious and he's actually concerned about something, but no one cares because it's just silly little Percy. But I like the crash scene with Thomas hitting the avalanche, and I don't know, it just really was a fun atmospherical kind of autumny, rainy, wet weather type episode. So that was fun. So all in all, A tier. Next episode, we have Bill, Ben, and Fergus, and I think we gotta stay in the A tier. I enjoy this one. I love the idea of pairing Bill and Ben, the most troublesome engines, with Fergus, and again, we get introduced to a new character. I like that, Season 7 doesn't wholly rely on Thomas having to be with the new character trope. This wasn't in Season 6, and this will be a trope coming in the future. Bill and Ben are introduced to Fergus, and Mavis too, but they're the ones who are kind of working off of Fergus, and their personalities really do clash nicely, and it really gets us to know Fergus better, especially seeing his sacrifice for the twins very quickly. Really fun episode. Love the avalanche sequence. That's really fun. Moving on, and we started off so well, but unfortunately we now move on to the old bridge. And this is a kind of controversial episode. People have argued and debated where they rank it. And I am in the F tier component, and here's my logic as to why I don't like this episode. I understand the argument of Skarloey could be having PTSD. Skarloey is over 100 years old, and that's more or less established in the show. This is an old engine that's been through a lot at this point. I don't think this is the first time Skarloey has crashed. I don't think this is the first time Skarloey's been put in great danger. I mean, it just, to me, it feels like a very contrived situation, and it feels out of character for Skarloey just not wanting to work. And it just doesn't feel right to me. It does feel out of character. If this was a story that took place, in his youth, I think it would work a lot better. I could see him growing the confidence here, but I don't know. There's a really interesting subset of episodes that starts really from around this point of narrow gauge episodes that feature Skarloey and Rhaeus, that if they were flashback episodes to their youth, I think that would be really cool. And yet they never really did that. So, I don't know. It is rather interesting. So, yeah, I did not enjoy this episode at all. Next episode we have here is Edward's Brass Band. And this is a fine episode, nothing really special. I'm going to put it, it's close to C tier, but I'm going to put it in B tier. It'll probably end up towards the end of B tier by the end of this tier list. I like this episode, it's fine, it's just really nothing special. It's interesting to see Edward get in a crash, because I think this is the first time we see him derail on screen, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure there's like someone's going to come in the comments and they're going to comment an episode where he does derail, but I mean, we're more than 100 episodes into this at this point, so I'm not going to remember every little thing that happened to every character. But yeah, it's a fine episode. Nothing particularly crazy. I do, it's only recently that I understood why I was confused by, like, the band scene at the end where they're playing music and Edward suggests that's alarm. It's just, for whatever reason, the music was just not right in that spot. It was just not, like, the right way to play it. It was just generic band music and not, like, frantic horns like it is in the UK dub, which, that is weird that it is different in the US dub because it does kind of change the context of the scene. Next we have What's the Matter with Henry? And this is an episode I hear people talk about how they feel about it, and I'm going to put this episode in upper B tier. I really like this episode, and I can understand people's concerns. I can kind of see why people look at Thomas and Percy as, like, out of character. They're not hugely out of character, because it's not something unreasonable for them to do. It's a little cruel, but it's not unreasonable. Thomas and Percy are both cheeky. And, there's been a lot of conversation about character development, whether it exists or not in the TV series. And the fact of the matter is, the TV series kind of does a lot of these soft reboots with each character. It, like, every few seasons. It kind of started, again, around season 6 to 7, so some of the characters became a little less cheeky, a little less mature. And then it happened again around, the CGI era when it first started, and then, it just keeps happening again and again and again. And so I'm kind of used to that, so it's kind of hard for me to really harp on character growth. I love Emily's dynamic with Henry in this episode, the fact that she's so caring. I kind of like Season 7 Emily. I like that she kind of comes to Sodor, and, she does involve herself in a lot of things, and she really puts herself out there. And I think it really does set the stage nicely for her to become a main character. Because now, within the first 6 episodes, she's interacted with Thomas, she's interacted with Henry, and she's going to interact with more characters as time goes on. And now for my favorite episode of Season 7, James and the Queen of Sodor. I love this one because of the Gordon and James dynamic. This is a fun episode where the two of them are just trying to one-up each other the entire time, and they just can't quite get that upper hand on them. And my personal headcanon for this episode is at the end when Percy sprays James with sand. I like to believe that was a trick by Gordon. I think that was set up. I think that was like Gordon having an ace up his sleeve. Because Percy's like smirking while doing it, and he does it so quickly like it's a rehearsed line. I think and that line has typically been used as a siding, so I'm going to say Percy was purposefully hidden there. That's just me. But yeah, I love this episode. Obviously, James is my favorite character, and I enjoy every episode he's in, but this was a great episode between him and Gordon. The Refreshment Ladies Tea Stand. One thing I really liked in Season 7 is we have a couple episodes this season that are kind of sequel episodes to previous stories. This being one of them, a sequel to Peter, Sam, and the Refreshment Lady, and I'm going to put it in B tier. Not a lot happens in it, but I can't really say there's anything wrong with it. I do enjoy it. I like the idea of restoring a coach into a Refreshment Lady stand. I think that's actually something that happened on the Tally-Flynn Railway, so that'll be interesting. Obviously, I like to see that Peter, Sam, and the Refreshment Lady still have a connection, years later, after the fact. It's a really nice episode. Again, a really nice storm sequence. And then we get introduced to another new character. It is Arthur, and this is a great episode. I'm going to put this in A tier. It's close. I think it's close to S tier, but I'm going to put it in A tier. I really enjoy this one. Really dynamic crash in this episode. Love it. Love, You know, this episode actually kind of scared me as a kid, just seeing the crash, because you have all these trucks being smashed, and you see, like, the fruit splattering everywhere, and it kind of looks like, you know, to kid me, it kind of looked like maybe guts or something being sprayed everywhere. I don't know what was going on in my mind. But I wasn't, like, terrified of this episode. It was kind of like it's kind of an unsettling image. But, you know, it was a really cool crash. I do like that. I like the cheeky side of Thomas and Percy this season. That is something that's been a part of their characters. They're still maturing, but they're still cheeky. And I like that Thomas does play a trick on Arthur. He sees this really smart, nicely decorated engine that's like, it's got this spotless record and all that. And Thomas, who's gotten into more trouble than anyone else knows, it's probably, thinking, oh, this kid needs to be taken down a peg. And he does. Probably not in the way that Thomas thought he did, but, and I like that this creates a bond between Thomas and Arthur, something that carries out later in the season. Toby and the windmill. Sorry. Just checking my list to make sure I have the order. I'm going to put this one in C tier. I like the storm scenes. This episode is just fine. Nothing too crazy. It's very simple. I will say, I can't remember if this episode had a ton of it in particular, but I do want to bring this point up that Season 7, there's a very obvious problem that the episodes use a lot of stock footage. Don't ask me why. I think it's probably because Season 7 was filmed at the same time as Jack of the Pack, and they ran out of time. And there are episode examples where it's used fine, and there are other ones where it's like, you could have maybe not used that footage, and there's a very glaring example that I'll bring up later on. But this episode is just fine. Nothing too crazy. Nothing really much to talk about it. And then we move on to A Bad Day at Castle Rock. And this episode's going to go in the A tier. I really enjoy this episode. Really like the atmosphere, especially the spooky night. I love that we get Donald and Douglas, and I alluded to this in my Season 6 tier list, review, and what I said is that there's an episode where the twins do argue, and I'm okay with it. I'm kind of okay with it in this episode. They briefly argue before leaving the docks, and it's because it's more of like a bantering argue about like whether a story's real. It's not like a serious argument where they're hating each other. I think it's just a little, brotherly banter, which I'm fine with that. That feels natural for the two of them to argue about the legitimacy of a rumor or a story. So, a lot of people talk about, the Old Bridge is one of the worst episodes of the classic series. In my opinion, I think the worst, or at least the worst this season, I believe that's what is in this picture. Yeah, I think this is it. Is Rheneas and the roller coaster. This episode does not make sense. Like, at all. So Rheneas is taking the school children. Fine, whatever. Then he ends up on the wrong line. He's not out of control. He can just stop and reverse. There is no problem here. And there's something very funny about this episode and another episode later on in the season that I'll bring up when I get to that episode. But this episode makes no sense. Why doesn't Rheneas stop? It's not like he's on a time crunch. There's given no reason why he can't stop and simply reverse and get onto the right line. It's not like Rheneas didn't know he was on the wrong line. He realized it right away. So this episode just doesn't really make sense. It just, I don't know. It doesn't make sense, so it goes in F tier. It's bad. It's not enjoyable. Bleh. Another episode, Salty Stormy Tale. And again, the effects in this episode are great. They do reuse footage from Cranky Bugs of the Ship, I believe. I think they do. Either way. Some of it might be new. But anyway, I'm fine with that. It kind of fit. I am going to put it in B tier. I love that, again, we're taking one of the new characters, Fergus, and we're applying him with other characters like Salty. A lot of people seem to have this misconception that Thomas and Percy were making fun of Salty, and I don't think they were trying to. Sorry about that, was interrupted, but as I was saying, I think there's this huge misconception about Thomas and Percy in this episode. Not sure why people think they were making fun of Salty. I don't think they were intentionally trying to. I think they heard Salty talking like a pirate And they were like, oh, that's kind of cool, we should try it too. And Salty interpreted it as them making fun of him. And that's why Emily kind of scolds them. Which, she's kind of out of line to scold them a little bit. But I kind of like that, because it kind of sets up this growth for Emily here, where, yeah, she's kind of a know-it-all. She always wants to do what's right and tell others what's right. And here's the first time that maybe she's a little out of line with it. And it's not really addressed too much in this episode, but it's a dynamic that we'll see more so in the next season. So, all in all, put this episode in B tier. Next episode, we have Oliver the Snow Engine, one of my favorite Season 7 episodes. It goes in S tier. I enjoy this one. It's nice to see Duck and Oliver get, like, one last episode together, even if Duck doesn't talk in it. But it's an enjoyable winter episode. The crash is iconic. Just a really fun episode. I loved Oliver and Toad's dynamic in it, and the switch up at the end, how they feel about snow. Really not much to say, because, I mean, everyone knows these episodes pretty well, so don't have too many strong opinions on them. Something Fishy is the next episode here, and this is another one that I enjoyed from this season, and I will put it in A tier. I think it's a really good follow-up to the Spotless Record. We see more of Thomas and Arthur's dynamic and how they've grown together as characters. And another really solid installment. I like that we finally see Arthur get his branch line, ironically by saving Thomas. So, that's really nice. And then we have The Runaway Elephant. This has some of the funniest narration by Michael Brandon in Season 7, like all the episodes. You can interpret that any way you want. So I will put this in A tier. I do enjoy this episode quite a bit. Really good action. See, this makes sense why Duncan's a runaway, because he can't control the elephant, and he's running down the mountain out of control, and he's going too fast, and can't stop. He didn't have a brake van. I do like the fact that the elephant ends up in the lake, and the fact they keep it there. That's kind of, it's a nice concept. So, overall, enjoyable episode. If it feels like I'm flying by, it's not a lot to really say on the episode to episode. There's a few that I really want to highlight, and we'll bring up those when we get to them. Peace and Quiet. Really nice episode. I think I'll put it in B tier, right around here. Really enjoyed this episode. I think overall, I liked Murdoch's introduction. I like, again, that he's not introduced with, like, Thomas and the others. We get him introduced with Salty and Harvey. That's the characters that really primarily interact with him. Like, Thomas meets him, but he's not, like, the only character he sees. So, once again, love Murdoch, love his introduction. I love the consist he pulled throughout this episode, and that was fun. Then we have Fergus Breaks the Rules / Thomas in the Search for Fergus. And this is a solid B tier episode if I can select it. There we go. Put it right around here. Enjoyable. I like the moment at the Ironworks when the Ironworks twins sneak up on Fergus and like, "Hello, are you happy to be here?" and it scares him away. I like the way Diesel's used in this episode. It feels like the first time since, you can argue Season 3, but I'll go to Season 2, that he feels sinister. He's not just pulling pranks. He's almost like to manipulate Fergus and going to the Ironworks, or going to the smelters, I should say, is, it's kind of a sick thing to do. And it just feels, very Season 2 Diesel-esque. Next episode is Bulgy Rides Again, and another sequel story. I think this one goes in B tier. I do like that we get a little bit of redemption for Bulgy. We get to see him interact with Emily, which feels like it's kind of a fever dream dynamic there. But yeah, solid story, enjoyable. I love the chaos of the chickens inside Bulgy and the passengers getting covered in feathers. Really funny, really enjoyable. Harold and the Flying Horse, solid episode. I'm going to put it in C tier. It's not a bad episode or anything. It's just kind of solid. Nothing too crazy happens. They rescue the horse. I like the joke about Pegasus and Percy. Other than that, solid episode. Nothing really crazy happens. Just a solid overall story. Then we have the grand opening. And this was an episode I used to not like, and then I haven't watched it in a few years, and I rewatched it, and I realized this episode has the energy of some Season 5 episodes, and that sounds very crazy to say out loud, but what I mean by that is it kind of reminds me of like Sir Topham Hatt's Holiday or Lady Hatt's Birthday Party, where it's an episode focused on the Fat Controller, and he's a little out of character being overly harsh to Skarloey, but I don't think it's like that ridiculous that it's worth really getting into a huff about. But I enjoyed this episode a lot, and for that reason I am going to put it in B tier, and I think I'd put it right around here. It was really fun. I love when the hot air balloon starts coming down and they're running out of hot air, and Lady Hatt's just like screaming about wanting to get out, and the Fat Controller just very bluntly and coldly just says, "Not now, dear." Like, just this dry kind of humor to it, and it's a very funny episode, and it makes me wonder why they didn't do more with the humans at this point in the show, because they clearly could still write for them well. Gordon and Spencer, I think, might be my favorite newbie episode of this season. I really enjoy him and Spencer's dynamic. You know, obviously, rivalry between A3s and A4s coming into play here, although Gordon isn't technically an A3, but we'll just say A3 for the sake of argument. You know, it's very apropos. Again, enjoyable story, you know, everything else with it. Not really much else to say about it. Good episode. Love the snarkiness of Gordon rescuing Spencer. Love James's lines at the end. Really just an overall nice episode. Not So Hasty Cake / Not So Hasty Pudding / Thomas and the Avalanche for some reason. It's a solid episode. It's a nice follow-up on Thomas and Elizabeth's dynamic. And it really feels like the season really wanted to play on so many dynamics. Maybe because they were thinking they would not revisit certain characters. I'm going to put this episode right here. It's a solid episode. Nothing too crazy happens in it. It's nice to see Terrence involved in the story, although he doesn't speak. Oh, and I just realized I did skip an episode, but we will come back. We will get to it really quickly. The Best Dressed Engine. And this episode, I'm going to make a very wild comparison. This episode and Renee's on the Roller Coaster are basically the same story, but this one is done much better. If you want to know how crazy they are to almost being the same story, if you listen to the US dub with Michael Brandon's music for both, it's borderline the exact same score, which is crazy. I never noticed that before, but the scores are like near identical. The difference is the Best Dressed Engine has hints of Gordon's theme sprinkled throughout. But yeah, this was an episode I referred to earlier as one that has weird stock footage, because you have that random shot of like Thomas from Season 1. I like that we continue to see Murdoch on Sodor, and we see him interact with some other engines like Gordon. But this episode makes a little more sense as to why Gordon doesn't stop. Because with Gordon, he's an express engine, and he technically doesn't need to see. So if his crew can see, he's fine. So it's not really a danger having a banner wrapped around him. I love the fact that, you know, he annihilates the cart that Trevor's pulling, and how close Trevor came to biting it. Like, that was a crazy crash. It was a fun moment. So overall, this episode's going in A tier, and I will rank it right around here. Trusty Rusty is another S tier episode. I really enjoy this one. I understand the argument about like the cruise and letting Duncan do something stupid, but it's not necessarily out of Duncan's nature to do something stupid. It would not surprise me if the story took place, you know, before he forgave Rusty and all that. But I really enjoy this one overall. I like the, you know, the old bridge set, the old wooden bridge set, you know, all that stuff. A really fun episode between both characters, and nice to see Rusty get another hero moment. And then Hooray for Thomas, which is kind of a bittersweet episode, because it's kind of the end of the classic series, at least within its main run. And I think it's a really enjoyable story. I'm going to put it in A tier. It was a really fun episode overall, and really was just a fun way to end it. I like that we call back to Thomas and Birdie's great race. And we see kind of a different maturity now in Thomas. And I know I talked about character growth, but I do kind of like that in an episode calling back to the first time Thomas and Birdie raced, and then Thomas is like, you know, I don't care about the race. I want to help the children. And he helps the children, and he still manages to win in the end. So yeah, as you can see here, I really enjoyed Season 7 overall. I think Season 7 was a better season than I think other people anticipated. I'm sure some people were turned off by like the narration or other things about it, but this was a fun season, and a lot of the episodes ranked highly. I really only had 2 episodes that ranked pretty low, and even the ones that were in C tier were just fine. So, really fun season. Next time I do another one of these tier lists, it'll be Jack in the Pack, and then that'll be the last of the 4.5 minute episodes. We'll be purely in 7 minute episodes for a while. So with that, this is Train King James signing off with yet again another tier list.